They say fire purifies, but what they don't tell you is that sometimes you have to burn everything down to rise from the ashes. I learned that lesson on my 18th birthday, the night my family tried to set me ablaze for entertainment. My name is Claire, and this is the story of how I became the architect of my own family's destruction. The camera was already rolling before I even walked into the dining room. I should have known something was wrong. The dining table at our house in Riverside, the nice suburb of Columbus where everyone pretended to be perfect, was decorated with streamers that looked like they'd been thrown up rather than hung with care. The cake sat in the center, a grocery store sheet cake with 18 candles jammed into the frosting at odd angles. No one had bothered to write my name on it. Mom stood at the head of the table, her manicured nails drumming against the wood. Dad leaned back in his chair with that expression he always wore when he looked at me, like I was a stain on his favorite shirt that wouldn't come out no matter how many times he washed it. And Jessica, my younger sister by 2 years, had her phone out, the little red recording light blinking in the dim room. I should have turned around right then, but I'd spent 18 years trying to be the daughter they wanted, so I walked forward and stood in front of that sad excuse for a birthday cake. Mom's voice cut through the silence, saccharine sweet in that way that made my skin crawl. Make a wish, Claire, though I doubt anything could help you at this point. I leaned forward to blow out the candles, and that's when I felt Mom's hand on the back of my head, not guiding me gently, pushing, hard. My face slammed into the cake with enough force to make my teeth ache. The candles didn't go out from my breath. They went out because my hair caught fire. I heard the sizzle first, then smelled the acrid stench of burning keratin. Panic seized my chest as I jerked backward, my hands frantically patting at my head while smoke curled up around my face. Mom's voice came from somewhere to my left, low enough that only I could hear it beneath the sound of my own gasping. Better to burn you than waste the cake. Dad's laughter boomed across the room. He slapped his knee like he'd just heard the funniest joke of his life. See? I told you she was useless. At least she can light up a room for once. That's something, right? Jessica's high-pitched giggle joined in, her voice dripping with mock concern. Oh my God, Claire, you look like a drowned rat that got barbecued. This is going straight to TikTok. I'm gonna get so many views. I finally managed to put out the flames, my hands shaking as I touched the singed ends of what used to be my shoulder-length brown hair. A whole section on the right side was gone, reduced to brittle, blackened strands that crumbled when I touched them. But as I stood there, breathing hard, something shifted inside me. For the first time in my entire life, I looked at each of them directly. Really looked at them. Mom's face was twisted in satisfaction, not horror. Dad was still chuckling to himself, already reaching for his beer. Jessica had her phone angled perfectly to capture my humiliation, her thumb hovering over the post button. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, memorizing their faces, cataloging their expressions of glee and indifference. The physical pain from my burned hair was already fading, replaced by something cold and sharp in my chest. Something that felt like clarity. That night was just the culmination of 18 years of systematic destruction. They'd been breaking me down piece by piece since I was old enough to understand that I wasn't wanted. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand what my life looked like before that birthday, before I finally saw them for what they really were. Growing up in our 4-bedroom colonial on Maple Street was like living in a performance where I was always the understudy who never got to go on stage. Mom, Sharon, was the president of the Riverside Garden Club and sat on the board of 3 different charity organizations. She wore her volunteer work like armor, using it to deflect from the fact that she was a monster behind closed doors. Dad, Richard, owned a successful insurance agency downtown. He was the kind of man who everyone at the country club called Dick and slapped on the back, never knowing that the nickname was more appropriate than they realized. And then there was Jessica. Golden child Jessica, who could do no wrong. She was a cheerleader at Riverside High, had a 4.0 GPA that our parents never questioned, despite the fact that I'd written half her papers, and was dating the quarterback. She was everything they'd wanted in a daughter, and I was the mistake that came first. I learned early that love in our house was conditional, and I didn't meet the conditions. When I was 7 and won the school science fair, Dad looked at my ribbon and said, "Too bad you're not pretty like your sister. At least smart girls can get office jobs." When I was 10 and made the honor roll for the third year in a row, Mom sighed and said, "Jessica made honor roll without even trying. You have to work so hard just to be average." By the time I was in high school, I'd stopped expecting anything different. I worked 2 part-time jobs, one at the library on weekends and another at the Coffee Bean on weekday afternoons. Mom said it would teach me responsibility. What she really meant was that it kept me out of the house and earning my own money, so they didn't have to spend anything on me beyond the legal minimum. Every penny I earned went into a shoebox hidden in the back of my closet. I told myself I was saving for college, but deep down, I think I knew even then that I was saving for an escape. The abuse wasn't always physical, though there were plenty of shoves and accidents that left bruises in places my clothes covered. It was the constant erosion of my sense of self-worth. It was Dad telling me I was lucky they kept me fed and housed when I could have ended up in foster care. It was Mom comparing every single thing I did to Jessica and finding me lacking. It was Jessica herself, learning from our parents that I was acceptable to use as a punching bag, both literal and metaphorical. At school, Jessica made sure everyone knew I was worthless. She and her popular friends had taken to calling me Candlehead after the birthday incident, though they'd been mocking me long before that. They'd stick matches to my locker with gum. They'd whisper just loud enough for me to hear when I walked by in the hallways. "There goes the reject. Can't believe she's even related to Jess. Probably adopted." I ate lunch in the library because the cafeteria was too dangerous. I kept my head down and focused on my grades because education was my only ticket out. I told myself that if I could just make it to graduation, just get into college somehow, I could leave and never look back. But they weren't content to just make my life miserable at home and school. They needed to humiliate me everywhere. There was the incident at Rosie's Diner on Main Street, the place where everyone in Riverside went for Sunday breakfast. We'd gone as a family, which was rare enough to make me nervous. Dad ordered the biggest meal on the menu for himself and Jessica. I ordered coffee and toast because I knew what was coming if I asked for more. Sure enough, halfway through the meal, Dad, accidentally, knocked over his Coke. The brown liquid cascaded across the table and straight into my lap, soaking through my jeans and making me jump up with a gasp. "Jesus, Claire, watch what you're doing," he barked, loud enough for the entire diner to hear. "You're so clumsy. Clean that up right now." I stood there, sticky and humiliated, while other families stared and then quickly looked away. The waitress brought towels, her eyes full of pity that somehow made it worse. Mom and Jessica didn't even pause in their eating. I cleaned up the mess Dad had made and spent the rest of breakfast standing near the bathroom because my pants were soaked through. No one said anything. Not the other families, not the staff, not the manager who'd known our family for years. That was the thing about the abuse. It happened in plain sight, but everyone pretended not to see it because Dad was successful and Mom was charming and Jessica was perfect. I was just the odd one out, the problem child, the one who must have done something to deserve it. The physical violence escalated as I got older. There was the time Mom shoved me down the stairs because I'd forgotten to pick up her dry cleaning. I tumbled down 8 steps and landed hard on my shoulder. The pain was blinding, but when I gasped out that I thought something was broken, Mom just looked down at me with cold eyes and said, "You're so dramatic. Get up and stop being clumsy." I'd walked around with a separated shoulder for 3 days before the school nurse noticed I was holding my arm at an odd angle and sent me to the emergency room. I lied and said I'd fallen during gym class. The doctor didn't believe me, I could see it in his eyes, but he couldn't prove anything. He set my shoulder and sent me home with a sling and painkillers I had to pay for myself. Dad looked at the hospital bill and said, "This is coming out of your college fund. Maybe now you'll be more careful." I didn't have a college fund, He knew that, I knew that. But the lie was important to him, so I nodded and went to my room. The breaking point came 3 months after my 18th birthday, in early September, when college acceptance letters had long since come and gone. Jessica had gotten into Ohio State on early admission, her acceptance guaranteed by an essay about overcoming adversity that had moved the admissions committee to tears. I'd read that essay. I should have recognized it. I was walking past Dad's study one evening when I heard him on the phone. The door was cracked open, and his voice carried clearly into the hallway. "Of course everything's going to Jessica," he was saying, his tone jovial in that way it only got when he was talking to his golf buddies. "She's got a bright future ahead of her. Ohio State, then probably law school. We've already started looking at condos near campus. Can't have our golden girl living in the dorms with the common students." There was a pause while the person on the other end said something. Then Dad laughed, and the sound made my blood run cold. "Claire? That one's a lost investment. I give her maybe 5 years before she's working checkout at a 7-Eleven, if she's lucky. She's just dead weight at this point. The sooner she's out of the house, the sooner we can convert her room into a proper home gym." I stood in that hallway, my hand on the wall to keep myself steady, and felt something inside me crack. Not break, not yet. Just crack, like ice on a frozen lake when you step wrong. But it was what I discovered the next day that finally shattered me completely. I'd been going through some old files on our shared family computer, looking for a photo I'd taken a few years back for a project. I found the photo. I also found a folder labeled Jess College Stuff. Curiosity made me click on it. Inside was her Ohio State application, including that award-winning essay about adversity. I read it once, then I read it again. Then I went to my room and dug through my closet until I found an old USB drive from freshman year of high school. The essay Jessica had submitted, the one that had earned her a spot at a prestigious university and a partial scholarship, was mine. Word for word, it was an essay I'd written for a statewide competition when I was 15. I'd won 3rd place. I'd been so proud. And Jessica had stolen it, changed the name at the top, and claimed it as her own. The metadata on my USB drive didn't lie. The creation date was 3 years before Jessica's application. The modification dates showed I'd worked on it over several weeks, refining and perfecting it. Jessica had just copied and pasted. I sat on my bedroom floor with that USB drive in my hand and felt the final piece of my old self die. The girl who'd kept hoping that maybe if she was good enough, smart enough, quiet enough, they'd love her. That girl was gone. In her place was someone new, someone cold, someone who understood that the only way to win against people like my family was to destroy them completely. I didn't make my plan in a rage. I made it carefully, methodically, over the course of the next 3 weeks. I went to school, I went to work, I came home and ate dinner in silence while they talked about Jessica's future and ignored my existence. And every spare moment, I gathered ammunition. The library where I worked had private computer rooms that people could rent for an hour at a time. I used them during my breaks, creating anonymous email accounts through VPN services I'd researched carefully. I was always good with technology. It was one of the few things I was better at than Jessica, though our parents never cared about that particular skill. At home, I waited until everyone was asleep and then crept into Dad's study. His computer password was Jessica's birthday, because of course it was. It took me less than 10 minutes to install a small keystroke logger I'd found on a tech forum, hidden in a folder so deep in his system he'd never find it. Every email he sent, every document he typed, every password he entered, it all got saved to a cloud account he didn't know existed. What I found was worse than I'd expected. Dad wasn't just an insurance agent. He was running several side schemes, cooking books for some of his wealthier clients in exchange for kickbacks. He'd been skimming from the company's client trust fund, just a little bit here and there, but over years it had added up to nearly $200,000. He'd used that money to pay for Jessica's private tutors, her cheer uniforms, the new car she'd gotten for her 16th birthday. Every bit of it was documented in emails and spreadsheets he kept on his computer, probably thinking he was safe because he had the only password. Mom was easier. I already knew about the affair from overheard phone calls, but I needed proof. I followed her one afternoon when she said she was going to garden club. Instead, she drove to a nice hotel on the east side of town. She met a man there, someone I recognized from seeing his photo in the Riverside Register. Councilman Patterson, married father of 3, champion of family values. I didn't have to follow them inside. I just had to wait 3 hours and photograph them leaving together, him adjusting his tie and her smoothing down her hair. Then I went to the library and dug into Mom's social media messages. She'd been bragging to her best friend Karen about the affair for months, going into explicit detail about their meetups. I screenshotted everything. Jessica's crime was already documented. I had the USB drive with my original essay. I had her application with the stolen work. I had the metadata that proved the timeline. And I had something else too, something I'd been quietly holding on to. Jessica had filmed my birthday humiliation and posted it to TikTok. She'd tagged me in it. It had gotten 12,000 views before I'd reported it and gotten it taken down, but I'd downloaded a copy first. In that video, you could see everything. Mom pushing my face into the cake, my hair catching fire, all 3 of them laughing while I panicked and tried to put out the flames. You could hear their voices clearly. Every cruel word. I had everything I needed. All that was left was to light the match. I started with Jessica because her crime was the most straightforward. On a Tuesday morning in late September, I walked into the library before my shift and used one of the private computers. The email I sent to Ohio State's Office of Academic Integrity was short and to the point. Subject: Academic Dishonesty in Admission Application, Jessica Morrison. Body: The attached essay was submitted as part of Jessica Morrison's admission application. However, this essay was plagiarized from work completed by another student 3 years prior. Attached, you will find the original essay file with metadata showing creation date and modification history, as well as documentation proving authorship. Additionally, I have included a video that may give your office insight into the character of the student you have admitted. I trust you will handle this matter appropriately. I attached the essay files, the metadata reports, and a link to a private video upload of the birthday footage. Then I sent it. The next morning, I tackled Mom. Councilman Patterson's wife was not hard to find. Her name was Linda, and she ran a popular mommy blog about raising good kids and maintaining a strong marriage. The irony wasn't lost on me. I printed out the most damning of Mom's messages to Karen, the ones where she described in detail what she and the councilman did together. I printed the photos of them leaving the hotel. I put it all in a manila envelope with no return address and dropped it in Linda Patterson's mailbox on my way to school. Dad was the most satisfying. He had enemies, plenty of them. His main competitor for the biggest accounts in town was a guy named Frank Woodward, who ran Woodward Insurance 2 blocks down from Dad's agency. They'd been rivals for 20 years, always trying to one-up each other. I sent Frank copies of everything, every email about cooked books, every spreadsheet showing the skimmed funds, every piece of evidence that Richard Morrison was not just unethical, but actively criminal. I also sent copies to the agency's board of directors and to the Ohio Department of Insurance. Then I sat back and watched the dominoes fall. Jessica's world collapsed first. The email from Ohio State came on a Friday afternoon. I was in my room when I heard her scream from downstairs. It was a sound of pure anguish, the kind of scream you'd make if someone had died. She came pounding up the stairs and threw open my door without knocking. Her face was blotchy and red, tears streaming down her cheeks, her phone clutched in one shaking hand. "What did you do?" she shrieked at me. "What the fuck did you do?" I looked up from my homework, my expression carefully neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Ohio State, they're rescinding my admission. They're taking away my scholarship. They're saying I committed academic fraud." She was sobbing now, barely able to get the words out. You did this! You fucking did this! Mom came running up the stairs, Dad right behind her. What's going on? Jessica, baby, what's wrong? Jessica shoved her phone at them. That bitch sent them my essay. She told them I plagiarized it. I stood up slowly, keeping my voice calm. I didn't send them anything. But if they found out you stole my essay, that's on you, not me. You're lying! Jessica lunged at me, but Dad caught her arm. You're a lying bitch and you've ruined my life. I ruined your life? I felt something cold and sharp unfurl in my chest. You stole my work. You stole 3 years of my effort and passed it off as your own. You got caught. That's not my fault. Mom's face was turning an alarming shade of red. You vindictive little snake, after everything we've done for you. Done for me? I laughed, and it sounded hollow even to my own ears. What exactly have you done for me? Fed me? That's the legal minimum. You've spent 18 years telling me I'm worthless, and now you're mad that I'm not letting you steal from me anymore? Dad's hand came up like he was going to hit me, but I didn't flinch. I just looked at him, and maybe he saw something in my eyes that made him think twice because his hand slowly lowered. Get out, he said, his voice shaking with rage. Get out of my sight before I do something I regret. I went back to my room and listened to Jessica sobbing downstairs. I felt nothing. No guilt, no satisfaction, just a cold emptiness where my heart used to be. The next explosion came 2 days later. I was at school when it happened, but I heard about it fast enough. The whole town heard about it. Linda Patterson had apparently opened her mail that morning and then made several phone calls. By noon, the story was everywhere. Councilman Patterson was resigning from the city council effective immediately due to personal family matters. His wife had filed for divorce. And Sharon Morrison, pillar of the Riverside community, was being dropped from every charity board she'd ever sat on. Mom came home that afternoon looking like she'd aged 10 years. Her phone had been ringing non-stop, but she'd stopped answering it. At the grocery store, her former friends had walked past her without a word. At the bank, the teller who usually chatted with her had been coldly professional. She knew somehow that I was behind it. I could see it in the way she looked at me when I came home from school. But what could she say? That her affair being exposed was my fault? That she was the victim here? She didn't say anything. She just went to her room and didn't come out for dinner. Dad's reckoning came last, and it came hard. The first sign was when 2 men in suits showed up at our door on a Wednesday evening. They identified themselves as being from the Ohio Department of Insurance, and they had questions for Richard Morrison. Dad went white. He actually stumbled backward when he saw their badges. I don't know what this is about, he started to say, but one of the investigators cut him off. We've received documentation indicating that you've been engaged in insurance fraud and embezzlement of client funds. We'd like you to come downtown to answer some questions. They didn't arrest him that night, but they might as well have. By the next morning, Dad was suspended from his agency pending investigation. By the end of the week, his bank accounts were frozen. The company's board had hired an outside forensic accountant, and every discrepancy Dad had tried to hide was coming to light. Frank Woodward, his competitor, was all too happy to talk to the press about the shocking allegations against his rival. The Riverside Register ran the story on the front page. Local insurance agent under investigation for fraud. Our house became a tomb. No one spoke to each other except in short, clipped sentences. Jessica stopped going to school because the humiliation was too much. She'd lost her college admission, her scholarship, and her reputation. The video of my birthday had somehow made its way around Riverside High, and people were no longer quite so charmed by the popular cheerleader. Mom stopped leaving the house entirely. The invitations had dried up, the phone calls had stopped, and she couldn't face the whispers and stares. Dad spent his days with lawyers, trying to figure out how to avoid prison time. And I kept going to school, kept going to work, kept living my life like nothing had changed. Because for me, nothing had. I'd always been alone in this house. Now they knew what that felt like. 3 weeks after I'd sent the first email, we had what would be our last family dinner. I made the meal myself because no one else was bothering. Just spaghetti and jarred sauce, nothing fancy. I set the table in the dining room, the same room where they'd tried to set me on fire for fun. When I called them to eat, they came slowly, suspiciously. We sat down in silence, and for a long moment, no one moved. Then they all started talking at once. "This is your fault," Jessica spat. "You ruined everything." "You destroyed this family," Mom added, her voice shaking. "You vindictive little monster." Dad just stared at me with cold hatred in his eyes. "What did we ever do to deserve you?" I stood up slowly and walked to the TV mounted on the wall. I'd set everything up earlier, had the video queued and ready. I hit play. The footage from my birthday filled the screen. 18 candles. Mom's hand on the back of my head. The flames in my hair. Their laughter. Every cruel word, every mocking laugh, all of it preserved in high definition. I let it play through to the end. The final shot was of me, tears streaming down my face, trying to smile through the pain because I was still trying to please them. That girl in the video looked so small, so desperate, so pathetic. When it ended, I turned back to face my family. All three of them had gone pale. "You asked what you did to deserve me," I said quietly. "That's what you did. That's what you've always done. You tormented me. You used me. You tried to break me for your own entertainment. And when I was finally done being your victim, you have the audacity to act surprised." I picked up the remote and pulled up the next files. Screenshots of Dad's embezzlement. Photos of Mom's affair. The side-by-side comparison of my essay and Jessica's application. "Jessica," I said, looking at my sister's tear-stained face. "I gave you back what wasn't yours. You built your future on my work, and now you have to face what you really are without it." "Mom," I turned to Sharon, who was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. "I let the world see the real you instead of the mask you wore. You don't get to be a hypocrite anymore." "And Dad," I looked at Richard, who was breathing hard through his nose, his face red with rage. "I let your numbers speak for themselves. You called me a failed investment. Turns out you're the one who's been failing for years." Dad stood up so fast his chair fell over. "You self-righteous little bitch. After we gave you everything." "You gave me nothing!" My voice came out louder than I'd intended. "You gave me scraps and called it generosity. You gave me abuse and called it parenting. You gave me trauma and expected gratitude. Well, here's my gratitude. I'm showing you exactly what you taught me. That family doesn't mean anything. That love is conditional. That the only thing that matters is winning." I walked to the hallway and picked up my backpack. I'd been slowly moving my important things out over the past few weeks, stashing them at the library, in my locker at school, anywhere but here. All that was left in my room were clothes I didn't care about and memories I wanted to burn. "You told me once that you'd rather burn me than waste a birthday cake," I said, looking at each of them one last time. "Well, I hope you enjoy the fire, because now that you don't have me to burn, you're going to destroy each other." I walked out the front door and didn't look back. Behind me, I could hear them starting to yell at each other, their voices rising in accusation and blame. They'd blame Jessica for being stupid enough to get caught. They'd blame Sharon for being reckless with her affair. They'd blame Richard for keeping evidence of his crimes. But they'd all blame me most of all, and that was fine. I was done caring what they thought. 4 months have passed since that night. I'm living in Cincinnati now, sharing a tiny apartment with 2 roommates I found on Craigslist. It's not much, just a bedroom in a converted attic, but it's mine. I work full-time at a bookstore called The Bookworm, and I'm taking classes at Cincinnati State Technical and Community College. I'm majoring in information technology because it turns out I'm really good at it. I heard through the grapevine that Dad took a plea deal to avoid prison time. He got 5 years probation and had to pay back everything he'd stolen plus fines. He lost his agency and had to declare bankruptcy. The house on Maple Street went into foreclosure. Mom and Dad are still together, though from what I understand they barely speak to each other. They moved to a small apartment in the bad part of Riverside. Sharon had to get a job at a retail store because all her charity positions dried up, and they needed the income. Jessica enrolled at community college, the same school where I'm taking classes now, though we're at different campuses. She had to pay her own way since all the family money is gone. I heard she's working at a fast food place to make ends meet. She doesn't have friends anymore. The popular crowd dropped her the second her reputation fell apart. None of them have tried to contact me. I think they know better. Yesterday, I was working my shift at the Bookworm when a family came in. Mom, Dad, and a little girl who couldn't have been more than 7. The girl picked out a book, something about a brave princess, and her parents told her how proud they were of her for being such a good reader. The mom kissed the top of her head, and the dad offered to carry her book to the register. I watched them from behind the counter, this normal family with their normal affection, and I felt something twist in my chest. Not jealousy exactly, more like grief for something I never had and never will. But then I looked around my bookstore, at the posters on the walls, and the cozy reading nook in the corner, and the regulars who come in and actually know my name and ask how my day is going. I thought about my apartment, cramped and drafty, but decorated the way I want it. I thought about my classes, the ones I'm paying for with my own money, the ones where I'm getting straight A's because I'm finally working for myself instead of for people who would never appreciate it. The fire they tried to use to burn me down ended up forging me into something stronger, something that can't be broken by people who mistake cruelty for power. I don't know if what I did was right. I don't know if revenge ever really is. But I know that I'm free now in a way I never was when I was trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. I know that every morning I wake up without that weight of dread in my chest is a morning I've won. They wanted me to burn. Instead, I used their fire to light my way out of the darkness they'd trapped me in, and I'm never going back.